Okay, I'm live with 52 weeks of AWS. The AWS security certification is the topic for today, and I'm going to dive right into logging and monitoring. So let's go ahead and take a look here at logging and monitoring and dive into some of the key details here. Well, really to start with, this is a critical way to think about security is to make sure that you have the data that is going to show you what's actually happening. So if we go ahead and dive into some of the specifics here, the first thing to keep in mind is what we're going to cover. So logging and monitoring access and control for security threats. We're also going to talk about how to read and interpret the logs, also how to monitor and report on AWS services, and also how to use CloudWatch and then use CloudTrail as well. So those are the key goals here. And let's go ahead and dive into the shared security model again. So if you look at in terms of the shared security model, the idea is that AWS is going to help you log and monitor access to resources. You help identify and react to behavior that seems strange. That's really the nutshell vision here. So if we think about the importance of logging and monitoring, you can think of it as like a dashboard or visualization here, and one of the things to consider is that logging refers to the automated capture and archival of chronological system events and states. On AWS, this is accomplished via a combination of both native and ancillary telemetry services. So if you look at Amazon Virtual Private Cloud, it has the ability to do network packet capture and analysis through the VPC flow logs, and this distributed stream processing pipeline is then going to be able to filter and aggregate packet metadata using heuristics. These could include classifiers, for example, that look for strange behavior. If you look at the Amazon Simple Storage Service logs, each HTTP request is going to eventually consist of object append model. So this means that cryptographic hashes of the access key identity are persisted to a serialized event log, and this provides an auditable trail of principals accessing the resources. So let's talk through the semantics here. It would include things like structured log events for timestamps, for identity, for example, cryptographic signing of requests, a resource. So a typical resource, for example, an object being accessed by an event, and also location. So geolocation or regional metadata to contextualize the source of that event. And then a consistent schema, which enables analytics like security monitoring, performance profiling, and diagnostic debugging by both first party and third party logging pipelines. So there's a lot going on behind the hoods with AWS. So why do we care about logging, and why is it so important? Because logging provides a critical source of telemetry for diagnosing and investigating issues across the technology stack. Robust logging and analysis is really important for security incident response, for performance profiling, and also to adhere to a regulatory compliance mandate. Some of the things to consider include accessing logs, application traces, system events, network flows, and these are key forensic data sets for reconstructing a sequence of events. The precise timestamps as well with nanosecond granularity enable you to correlate, for example, a distinct host and a service. Also, regulations like HIPAA, GDPR, or LGPD impose obligations, and these are auditing and retention obligations. Cryptographic evidence is also important, like a digital signature with a structured log event, and this can validate immutable integrity guarantees. So, this includes things like algorithms for behavioral anomaly detection or performance degradation, and also emerging threats. Some of the advanced techniques could include statistical profiling, heuristics, even machine learning could be used to derive insights from these massive data sets. So, really, logging is a critical feedback loop for developers and operators to incrementally improve the stability, the security, and the reliability. And thoughtful instrumentation and centralized aggregation is building an essential capability in your system. So let's dive into a little bit more here. So what is monitoring? Well, if we look at what monitoring is, it's continuous telemetry and alerting, so that it provides situational awareness and also rapid detection of anomalies across complex distributed systems. If you look at AWS, it's going to give you native and also third party tools for comprehensive monitoring. And AWS CloudTrail is going to implement an append only audit log for API calls and events. So this means things like detailed attributes for user identities, timestamps, source IPs, and also the request parameters so that you can build a forensic trail if you need to investigate a particular incident. Also, the CloudWatch system is going to be able to ingest high resolution system and application metrics for real time monitoring. And you can also do adaptive threshold based alarm triggers as well. Holistic observability is another way to consider what's going on. This enables you to diagnose performance degradation, availability issues, and also security events. And well instrumented monitoring is going to give you a runbook of automation to enable a mitigation of both a known problem or even a new problem that you haven't seen in the past. And so this is really the key goal here, is that you're going to get the ability to detect and respond to incidents so that you're going to minimize the operational, financial, and reputational damage. And by having telemetry, it's the foundation for being able to do things like chaos engineering or site reliability, or even doing game days for cyber resilience practices. So what are the key takeaways here when we think about monitoring and logging? Well, logging is the collection and recording, and monitoring is continuous verification. And then AWS itself is going to provide several services that you can use to log and monitor your resources. So let's talk about capture and collect here next. And there are some services that are important to be aware of. So first, let's dive into CloudTrail here. It's an immutable audit log for tracking user activity and API calls across AWS services. And it's going to implement a scalable event pipeline for security analysis, compliance, and operational forensics. So let's talk through the key capabilities of what the service provides. Cryptographical verification of API events, for example, user identity or IP address, durable event storage in S3 as well. So log encryption, cross account delivery, serverless stream processing, querying APIs or SDKs, automatable trail management, regulatory compliance, also internal security policies, root cause analysis, and protection against insider threats and compromised credentials. So really, it's a comprehensive capability that you get with AWS CloudTrail. Now let's dive into API security relevant information. So CloudTrail is going to give you metadata for reconstructing a sequence of events across services. So let's walk through what that could be. It would be API name. This would be the unique identifier and the semantics of something. For example, if you're going to stop an EC2 instance, the principal ID is the cryptographical verification of the caller. So this could be the IAM user, the role, or the service. The timestamps as well. So this would be nanosecond precision timestamps in UTC, source IP, request parameters, response elements, and then you can recreate the order of events by looking at things like anomalous behaviors. You can look up API documentation to make sure that you understand what's going on in a log. You can map the IP address to an organization or a security group, and you can determine if a request is successful based on response code. So really, CloudTrail is an immutable evidence trail for security, compliance, and operational diagnostics. So let's talk through what this would look like in terms of reading an actual log file here. If we look at what a log file looks like, you can see here that this log file is going to show that someone was doing some kind of an action. And so you can ask yourself a question, what type of account did the log collect information about, and what can you actually determine from the ARN element? So if we go next here, we can look at what's happening. It says, essentially the event source field is one of the key fields, and in the event name field, you can see that stop instances is going to give you a value. And so if you then look at what's going on, it's what method is used to perform this action. Was it the console? Was it the AWS CLI, et cetera? And this could give you essentially evidence of maybe improper usage. So if we go into the log itself now next, in the instance ID field, you can look at the particular instance itself. And you also can look at the actions that were performed. So if you need to track changes to a resource or answer questions, etc., you can see here's very detailed information about the logs. So what are the key actions and takeaways here is that CloudTrail is for governance, compliance, and auditing, and actions taken by a user or role are going to be recorded as events inside of here. And these could include things like the identity of the caller, for example. So what about AWS services with built-in logs here? Let's go ahead and take a look at that next. So in terms of services with built-in logs, S3 is a good place to start. It's a native server access logging. So it enables you to capture detailed records that are made to a bucket. It could allow you to troubleshoot unauthorized access or even strange activity. You can look at access patterns to optimize performance and reduce cost. You can investigate issues for customers or even flagged things that you've seen. You can also validate the compliance. So this is really critical because it's a data source. Do you have proper data governance policies, standards, and regulations? And what about the event reconstruction as well? That's one of the things you can get with this service. And then you can correlate other parts of the system by having holistic monitoring and alerting. So if we look at VPC next here, there's another service that it allows you to, through the VPC flow logs, look at the packet capture in a non-intrusive way. So there's no performance overhead. Also, you can look at the granular controls. You can look at timestamps as well. You can look at the flow data. And the key use cases would be network monitoring, security analysis, traffic engineering, compliance auditing, right? Those are some of the things that you can think about. Let's look at ELB here next. ELB is an interesting one because it's going to give you the ability to look at the timestamps with millisecond precision in a chronological order. So this would include things like client IPs and port numbers, latency, HTTP methods, also status codes and the response size. And so you could look at things like debugging, security analysis, caching strategies, usage patterns. Also, you can look at things like correlation metrics. So really the load balancer logs are invaluable if you want to look at observability, security, and operational analytics. Okay, let's get into monitoring and reporting here next. And that's really the key capability of CloudWatch. It's a comprehensive monitoring, logging, and event stream processing service that enables you to observe the entire AWS environment. This includes things like, for example, the metrics and alarms, logs, events, dashboards, and the key capabilities would be the holistic visibility of the telemetry, also automated anomaly detection, retrospective analysis, distributed tracing, and also look at the serverless system, which can be very complex to debug. So it's a foundational service for observability. That's really the best way to think about CloudWatch. Okay, let's dive into the difference between CloudTrail and CloudWatch. This is always very confusing because they sound similar, but they're very different. CloudTrail and CloudWatch are complementary telemetry streams that enable you to do monitoring, alerting, and incident response. So CloudTrail gives you high fidelity records of API calls, by the user, by the service, and the console, so you can reconstruct the sequence. CloudWatch allows you to ingest the fine-grained performance metrics and logs to detect the anomalous behavior in real time. CloudWatch alarms are able to trigger automatically if there's a threshold against a metric or log pattern, and CloudTrail events can pipe into CloudWatch logs for querying and alarming. And you can correlate the CloudTrail API traces with CloudWatch metric logs to provide a uniformed observability. So let's look through some use cases here to clarify this. The alarm could trigger on an unusual spike in EC2 delete instance, and this would indicate, let's say, a compromised credential. You could have an identity-related performance degradation when an instance count drops unexpectedly. You could query the CloudWatch logs for error codes. If you look at instance deletions, you could reconstruct the sequence of events during a security incident to look at how this would work out on both the telemetry side as well as the security side. So basically, when you integrate the two services, you're able to have a comprehensive security, compliance, and diagnostic environment. Okay, key takeaways here are that CloudWatch is a unified view of operational health. CloudWatch is monitoring and operational data. CloudTrail, though, is for monitoring actions, and CloudWatch monitors performance. And you can create custom dashboards, alarms, and notifications for key metrics. So let's talk through here at the next section, which is best practices for logging and monitoring. So the idea here is that you want to have a systematic approach to leverage the observability services. This would include identifying the monitoring objectives. So what are your KPIs or service level agreements, and what are the metrics? So security, reliability, performance. And then you want to do a risk assessment to make sure that you don't have a vulnerability according to that new metric you've defined. If we look at instrumentation, for applications and infrastructure, you would want to enable logs, metrics, and traces using the SDK, the agents, and the service hooks. And then that telemetry data is going to go to a centralized aggregation platform. Once you've got the data aggregated, you can then do correlation. And this could be something like joining an event from different sources to make some kind of finding. You also would want to do a baseline. So what does the typical load time look like on this particular server? And then you also want to set alerts or alarms. So for example, if the EC2 instance is at 95% CPU, there's something wrong, we should send an alarm. You also want to be able to do ad hoc analysis. So for example, if there's some kind of an issue, you want to be able to query your system and essentially say, what's going on with my system? Also automation, right? That's one of the key triggers here, is that auto scaling, failover, self-healing. And then you want to iterate based on the insights. So if you have no data, no instrumentation, how could you possibly, iterate without that data? So it's critical to have the performance data for iteration. So let's talk through some additional services here as well for logging and monitoring. One of them is Trusted Advisor, which is a lot of times not really paid attention to, but it's really nice because it can reduce the attack surface area by closing security gaps. It also can show you things like right sizing and optimizing resources, and you can also resolve reliability issues before they cause an outage. So it's a less used but also very useful resource. We also have EventBridge, and EventBridge, the key thing here is that it enables real-time monitoring and auditing, and you can even respond to infrastructure and application events. So you see this a lot with serverless, where you could decouple an event producer from a consumer like Lambda. You can do a wide range of event sources, so APIs, you can do queues, schedules, third-party apps. You can filter and route events as well based on content, source, and account. And you can also have low latency delivery and use at least once guarantees for reliability. If we think through some of the use cases here, it would be things like triggering notifications or ingest monitoring and metric streams or audit trails, workflow automation, and also time-based schedules like a cron type thing. Like, for example, go to this API, pull some data, and put it into a database for me. Let's talk through Security Hub as well. So, Security Hub is a centralized security monitoring and compliance service. It could aggregate the alerts, the findings, the insights, and also even third party security services. And it's going to enrich the raw data with context. And then you can correlate the findings to reduce the noise. So, that's one of the big issues with any kind of centralized logging system is you're going to have to reduce the noise by doing correlations, and this is going to provide a unified security across services and accounts, and also give you automated response. And you can even quantify security benchmarks as well. So it's a way of delivering continuous data driven visibility, priority, and automation for a cloud security program. Let's talk through AWS Config. AWS Config is a continuous resource inventory, configuration history, and change notification. Why would you want to use it? Well, for governance, compliance, and security. These are the key reasons typically. And so you want to see what's happening. Like, are you able to have a standard of a particular policy you're trying to configure and what's happening? Can you audit it? Can you do a validation of controls? And also a security analysis of configurations and IAM policies. You can look at change management workflows. You can also do operational troubleshooting for historical configs. And you can look at infrastructure as code enforcement and drift detection. So if someone went in, accidentally tweaked a server, for example, this is a type of service that would detect that and say that's a drift, right? We don't want manually someone going in and changing some kind of security policy on a machine. It's drifted. Let's reapply the security changes. Okay, let's go ahead and wrap things up here. We covered quite a bit of stuff in about 30 minutes, and we talked about comprehensive logging across services, applications, and infrastructure. And this gives you an audit trail for security analysis and compliance and diagnostics. CloudTrail allows you to log API calls to reconstruct sequences of events, while CloudWatch ingest performance metrics for real-time monitoring. You can correlate multiple data streams like logs, metrics, and traces. And this would be something I would call holistic observability. And you can alert on anomalous events or thresholds. You can do regular audits with tools like AWS Config or Trusted Advisor. You can also do metrics with security-based scores. You can also do automated response and remediation workflows by looking at monitoring events. So the goal here is that you're going to get visibility into security and operational state by using these high-level services on AWS. So really, in a nutshell here, there's a lot of stuff on AWS that's all designed for you. All you have to do is just turn it on. And AWS CloudTrail is really the beginning of being able to do systematic monitoring for security. And it's definitely a best practice to have it enabled. And one of the best ways to learn about it is to actually just turn it on and dive into the details and look at the different logs. All right, that's it for today. Next week, I'll continue to do a security certification lesson. See you then.